Hello, and welcome back to my channel, Talented Reads. We are back with another wrap-up video, which is my August wrap-up for the Horror Challenge. From our lovely graphic, which I'd like to reiterate that I did not create, we are continuing in the monster section. I have completed all of the subgenres under the paranormal section, and last month I tackled zombies. I do have a playlist for all of the other wrap-ups for the horror challenge, so if you're interested in checking any of those out, I will link the playlist in the description box below. So, August was all about vampires. Vampires was my first introduction to horror, in which I read Dracula by Bram Stoker. I fell in love with the book, and it still remains to this day my all-time favorite book. Vampires are near and dear to my heart. And probably the most content I've consumed, both books and movies, out of all of these horror subgenres. Just a reminder for this challenge, it is a mixture of books and movies, both new for me, and then we'll go over some of the recommendations I have. So let's get into it. In August, I read a total of 5 vampire books. Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan LeFew. This follows Laura as she tells the story of the intriguing Carmilla, who becomes a house guest after a carriage accident and is taken in by her father. This was a beautiful story. I really enjoyed it. I was a little nervous going into it because it's an older story, and sometimes the language and verbiage can kind of take you out of the story. But I didn't seem to have that problem with this. I thought it moved at a good pace. I really enjoyed the relationship between the two characters. Goodreads advertises this as a gothic, and I think that's a pretty solid advertisement. I think, with it being kind of set in this big mansion, and of course, the happenings at night kind of gives it that eerie atmosphere. And I think the vampirism is subtle yet obvious to the reader, which I think is a nice touch. And my particular copy had illustrations in it, which are just fantastic, and I thought really helped kind of bring the story to life. Fledgling by Octavia E. Butler. We open the book with our main character, Shori, who wakes up in a dark cave suffering from amnesia. Right away, we determine she is definitely not human, but in fact has vampiric tendencies. And we follow Shori as she starts to uncover her truth and survive in a world where she is different. I really enjoyed this one too. I thought Shori's amnesia worked in favor of the storyline. There was a lot about the vampire community and just culture in this story that, with Shori's amnesia, we kind of got to learn all of the ins and outs alongside her, which I don't think would have quite had the same impact in a different type of storyline. And I also thought the kind of symbiotic relationship that is happening in the story between the vampire and the human was an interesting take, although I think it did kind of dim the scariness factor a little bit, but still really enjoyable book. Carrying Comfort by Dan Simmons. This is told in two timelines, the past and the present, and this is ultimately about Saul and his decades-old journey to hunt down an evil that he experienced in the Nazi extermination camp. But in his journey, the hunter becomes the hunted. So, I think this book would have been better, like 200 pages shorter. There was just a lot in here, and some of it really felt unnecessary. A book that long that is just really about someone trying to track down another person, it really starts to get repetitive fast. And the language for some of the characters was pretty racist. Like, I know we're trying to make a point that the character is a horrible person, but I think there's other ways to get that across. I don't know, I was a little taken aback by all of that. And then, of course, there's a lot of scenes of one vampire in particular, like, using his powers to take advantage and rape women, which is like one scene of that would have been enough. Like, we don't need it over and over again. Like, that doesn't do anything to the freaking storyline. So, I don't know. I was a little like, let's move along. This is my first Dan Simmons book, and I do have a couple others on my shelves. So, hopefully those will be more enjoyable. Next is Nightblood by T. Chris Martindale. This is about Chris Stiles, who is enlisted by his dead brother Alex to travel to the small, quiet town of Isherwood, Indiana, to battle a legion of bloodthirsty vampires. This was another good read. I loved Chris's character. I think he's a top-notch hunter. This is actually from the perspective of the hunter instead of the vampire, which I think when you read a lot of vampire books, you get at least one perspective from the vampire. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And he kind of just, like, he takes no shit, makes no apologies. So there's a lot of, like, just rough battling it out with the vampires, which of course is gory and horrifying in itself. And I did love the mix of vampires with the ghost from the brother. I thought that was an interesting kind of mix of supernatural elements. And lastly is In the Valley of the Sun by Andy Davidson. This follows Travis as he wakes up one night and realizes he's become a monster. In a separate POV, we follow Texas Ranger, who is hunting Travis to make him pay for his crimes. I really wanted to love this one. It seems to be a favorite among a lot of horror readers, but it just didn't quite do it for me. Now, there is kind of this underbelly subplot of the serial killer, which I thought was a good twist. And the main vampire chick is kind of scary But a lot of the book is about Travis himself, and he's just very underwhelming. And I really didn't care that much for his relationship and interactions with Annabelle and her son. So some of his decisions that he had, like, it just, I don't know, it seemed off-putting. But again, I have another Andy Davidson on my shelf that I'd love to get to, so hopefully that one will be a better fit for me. So that's it for the books I read. Let's talk about the movies that I watched. First is 30 Days of Night. Barrow, an Alaskan town at the very most northern tip, is plunged into darkness for 30 days in the middle of winter. Soon they find themselves overrun by vampires that are attracted to the promise of feeding for 30 days. So this has actually been on my list to watch for a while now, and I'm really glad I finally got around to it. I thought it was a really good vampire movie, and the isolation and kind of this survival and countdown of those 30 days, I think really upped the angst and the fear, even for you watching the movie. And to me, I think a lot of vampire books and movies kind of play up to the sexy side of vampires, which I don't mind sometimes, but I personally love my vampires downright scary as hell, and this certainly lived up to that. Next is Nosferatu. Yes, this was on the list. I even watched the black and white 1922 silent film. Go me. This is about Count Orlok, a vampire, who preys on the wife of Jonathan Harker, his estate agent. Count Orlok buys property in London and brings chaos along with him. I mean, it's a 1922 film. I mean, it's not scary, but it is a classic. I mean, it's even like when the characters talk, like you can't hear them. It'll just like cut to a clip of like what they're saying, which is so old school, and I love it. I don't think I've ever watched the whole thing before, so I'm glad to have finally watched it in its entirety. Bram Stoker's Dracula is next, and I'm talking about this one next because it's exactly the same premise as Nosferatu. What surprised me most about this movie actually was the cast. There's some big names in here, and I can't believe I haven't watched it before. There's, Gary Oldman playing the Count, Winona Ryder playing Mina Harker, Keanu Reeves playing Jonathan Harker, and Anthony Hopkins playing Van Helsing. I mean, come on. However, with even that cast, it just wasn't my favorite. Remember how I was saying that a lot of vampire movies play up to the sexy, alluring side? Yeah, that's this movie. I mean, I would say if you like vampire porn, then this is a must-watch for you. And my last movie is The Lost Boys. This is about Michael and Sam, who moves to California to stay with their grandfather, but discover that the city has a pretty dark vampire crowd. I really enjoyed this movie. It's more of a light comedic horror, but I mean, it's set in the 80s and it's like pure nostalgia with just an awesome soundtrack. Like, how can you go wrong? All right. Now for my recommendations. First, let's run through the book recommendations. I have 4 of them. Let the Right One In by John Lindquist is about 12-year-old Oscar who befriends a new neighbor, a girl who appears the same age as him, but he notices odd things about her, like how she only comes out at night. I do love this book. I've reread it several times, and I actually just did a reread of it earlier this year. There's some rough scenes in here, but what I think I like most is that, you know, although it's about vampires and vampires being the monsters, the horrifying scenes are also from very real people, and I think that kind of just reminds you that people can be monsters too without being vampires. And of course, the perspective of the kids makes it a unique vampire read. The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This is about Patricia and her close-knit book club who read true crime. Children began to go missing, and as the deaths are kind of written off by the police, Patricia decides to enlist the help of her book club to solve a real crime. This is probably my second favorite Grady Hendrix. His books always have a good mix of comedy, friendship, and horror. And I loved that this was kind of a book club and a true crime one, no less. American Vampire by Scott Snyder. This is a graphic novel series. In volume 1, we meet Pearl, who has turned into a vampire and goes on a revenge binge righting her wrongs. We also meet Skinner Sweet, the original American vampire. I love this graphic novel series. The rest of the volumes continue with Pearl and Skinner. I thought the graphics were great for the series, and both Pearl and Skinner Sweet were terrifying. And of course the graphics were graphic. I will say that I liked the earlier volumes better than the later ones. I thought the story got a little repetitive at the end, but I would still highly recommend the whole series. The Strain by Chuck Hogan and Guillermo del Toro. This is a trilogy, and it's basically an apocalyptic vampire book about an epic battle between human and those infected with a vampire virus. These are great, and I would love to reread them at some point. The cast of characters is perfect for the storyline, and I thought the vampiric plague was an interesting take. And let me tell you, there's no vampire sex here because these infectious beings are freaking terrifying. And I equally loved the other two books in the series, The Fall and The Night Eternal. I thought there were some really good reveals in both books that kind of kept me engaged and wanting more. I thought each book did a great job tying in and kind of building off of the previous book. Now, I will say, like, I know this is a TV series by the same name, and it hasn't gotten great reviews at all. I personally haven't seen it, but from what I've heard, it will not be something I will watch. So if you've seen the TV show and hate it, please give the book series a try. All right, and lastly are my movie recommendations. I have 4. Let Me In. This is the U.S. movie title for the book Let the Right One In. This follows the premise of the book, though the names have been changed. I equally love the movie. I think the young kid actors did such a great job portraying the fear and confusion and just them kind of building their friendship. And Chloe as Abby, what great graphics for a vampire. It was kind of more of a darker, subdued movie, but really kind of built on that fear and, the vampire. The only vampire we ever really see is Abby, and she's in itself scary as hell, so. Underworld. This follows the war between vampires and lycans, or werewolves. This is about Celine, who is a death dealer for the vampire clan, and has become entwined with a human that the werewolves are after. So when I first saw this movie trailer, I was like, we'll see. But I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I would. And it has become a favorite of mine. I think the vampire and werewolf fight is such a classic trope, but both species are equally horrifying and powerful in this movie. And I enjoyed the vampire coven kind of ranking system and the mix of kind of both of those sides along with the human. I thought that was a good kind of trifecta. I think there are a total of 5 movies in this franchise. I actually haven't seen all of them, but the first one's always the best. Blade. This is about Blade, who is half vampire, half human, who is a vampire hunter and hell-bent on taking them all down. I mean, it's Wesley Snipes and Stephen Dorff, so need I say any more? I've watched this movie so many times and I never get sick of it. I thought the concept of the vampire hunter being a vampire himself was an interesting take, because usually it's more of the vampire versus, the humans versus the vampires. And there's just some really good fight scenes and good old vampire blood, can't beat it. And lastly is Fright Night. Charlie meets his new next door neighbor, who turns out to be a vampire. He then prepares to fight to save his girlfriend and his neighborhood. So this particular movie is the 2011 remake I actually haven't seen the original 1985 movie. And I know this movie has gotten a lot of hate, but I really enjoy it. Again, we've got the seductive vampire mixed with this terrifying vampire. And I thought Colin Farrell did a great job playing the vampire. I thought this had a really good storyline. There were some really good fight scenes. There's some comedy mixed in there. The movie seems long, but I never felt like it dragged in places. And the pacing was good. And there were some good reveals that I thought were placed at just the right spot. Yeah, it's just a good old vampire movie. So that's all I have for this video. I had a blast reading and watching more vampire content. Drop a comment below and let me know what your favorite vampire books and or movies are. Stay tuned for September, where it's all about werewolves. Woohoo! Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.